It was a gray Thursday morning in early autumn, the kind of morning where the sky hangs low and the air carries a scent of burning leaves and far-off rain. The little town of Willow Springs hadn't changed much in 50 years. One main road, 2 traffic lights, and a row of shops that looked like they belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting. Old Mr. Green, who ran the shoe repair shop, was setting out his signboard when he noticed a man standing across the street. He was tall, maybe in his 70s, with a worn brown coat that hung past his knees, frayed at the cuffs. His shoes, strangely enough, were polished to a mirror shine. His hat, an old fedora, tilted just slightly, and a white scarf fluttered in the breeze. He looked like someone who had fallen through time. Nobody recognized him. That's what struck people first. In a town where everyone knew everyone, and everyone's business, a new face, especially an old one, drew attention. He wasn't panhandling. He didn't speak. He simply walked from storefront to storefront, peering inside like he was searching for something, or someone. At Maggie's Diner, the town's meeting ground for gossip and black coffee, folks gathered by the window. "Who is he?" asked Jenny, who had worked there since 1989. "No idea," replied Hank, a retired mailman. "Looks like he hasn't got 2 dimes to rub together." "He tipped his hat to me," said Rose, the florist. Mannerly, like he was from another world. The man walked past the old town bank, now a community theater, and paused in front of the closed-down hardware store. His eyes lingered on the faded sign, then drifted up toward the second-floor windows. Then quietly, he moved on. By noon, whispers had started. Some thought he was homeless. Others guessed he was a drifter. A few suspected dementia. But old Sheriff Mallory, who had served 3 decades and seen everything from runaway goats to moonshine stills in the woods, felt something different. He watched the man from his office window. "That fella's not lost," he muttered. "He's remembering." At about 2 p.m., as a light drizzle began to fall, the stranger walked into Maggie's Diner. He removed his hat politely, nodded at the waitress, and sat at the far end of the counter. When Jenny approached, he smiled. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Black." She poured him a cup, noting his hands, clean, nails trimmed, but bearing the faintest traces of something more. Calluses, ink stains, hard to tell. "You passing through?" she asked casually. "In a way," he replied, sipping the coffee. "But you might say I'm revisiting." "You from around here?" "Once." That's all he offered. He paid with exact change. No card, no wallet flash. Just 3 neatly folded dollar bills and a quarter. He left a $1 tip. But before he left the diner, he turned to Jenny and said, "If Mr. Green still cobbles shoes, tell him I'll be by before sunset. I've got an old pair that needs a second life." And then he was gone again, strolling down Main Street like a man walking through memories. Later that afternoon, word spread that he had gone into Carter's real estate. Young Nathan Carter ran the place now, but his father still kept an office upstairs. It was the kind of spot where nothing exciting ever happened, just property deeds and old ledgers. But when the stranger entered, something unusual occurred. Nathan watched through the window as his father, who usually kept to himself, rushed down the stairs and embraced the man. "Donald," Nathan heard his father say, his voice cracking with emotion. "You came back." The name rang like a bell. Donald Trump. It couldn't be. Could it? Nathan thought it was a joke, some prank. The Donald Trump, the billionaire, the former president, the man who had built towers and stirred nations. This man wore a coat from the Salvation Army and shoes that had danced with time. Yet there was something in his eyes, an intensity, a weight, that carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much and said too little. The elder Mr. Carter led him upstairs, and for the next hour, the blinds were drawn. By the time they opened again, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened with a damp glow. Donald Trump stepped out into the cooling air, adjusted his scarf, and looked around the street like he had made peace with something. Nathan watched him leave, stunned. "Dad, was that really?" His father nodded slowly. "That man owns half the street, son. Always did." "But how? Why hasn't anyone ever said?" "Because he never wanted anyone to know, and I gave him my word." The mystery deepened. No reporters came, no cameras, no social media buzz, just the quiet, steady hum of a town that had almost forgotten what it meant to carry secrets made of sorrow and pride. And that night, as the last light faded, Mr. Green stayed late in his shop, waiting for the man with the tired coat and polished shoes. The bell over the door jingled softly. "Evening, Mr. Green," the man said. "You came. I told you I would." Green brought out an old, cracked leather pair of Oxfords. "They've waited a long time." Donald smiled. "So have I." As he sat, letting the shoemaker examine the soles, he looked out the window at the quiet town. "I used to sweep these streets as a boy," he said gently, "and I promised myself, if I ever made it, I'd come back." Green paused, his hands trembling. "And now?" Trump looked at him, eyes soft. "Now I'm just trying to remember who I was, before I forgot what mattered." The wind stirred, brushing against the windows like the breath of time itself, and outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a golden glow over the little town that still held its secrets and waited for them to bloom. By morning, Willow Springs was abuzz, though no one quite knew what to say. The stranger who'd appeared, then disappeared into the folds of their little town, had stirred something deeper than curiosity. It was reverence, mixed with disbelief. At Maggie's diner, the regulars leaned closer to their coffee mugs, whispering theories over buttered toast. Sheriff Mallory, who rarely indulged in gossip, sat quietly in the corner booth, chewing slowly and watching everyone with eyes that had grown sharper with age. "I saw his hands," Jenny said again. "I swear to you they weren't the hands of a stranger. They were like someone who used to belong here." "No one just walks in and knows Mr. Green by name," Hank muttered. Something ain't adding up. Only Rose the florist dared say what others had thought. What if it was Donald Trump? That brought a pause. Then laughter. Nervous, uncertain laughter. Rose didn't laugh. "I've seen people pretending to be rich. They dress the part, but they can't hide their eyes. That man, he was hiding something else entirely. Like he was rich, but didn't want to remember." Later that day, Nathan Carter stood in his father's office, still trying to grasp the truth. "Dad," he said, gently but persistently, "you have to tell me more." His father, Roger Carter, had spent his life behind these wooden desks and dusty ledgers. He looked up slowly, aged fingers resting on a worn leather portfolio. "You remember the old Ridley Theater?" "Yeah. It closed when I was a kid. Fell into ruin." Roger nodded. "Donald bought it, quietly, through a holding company. That's how he did it all. The hardware store, the old bakery, even the warehouse by the river." "But why?" Roger leaned back, eyes lost in another time. "He used to come here as a boy, summers. His uncle had a cabin outside town. His father made him do odd jobs, painting fences, sweeping sidewalks, cleaning shop windows. Most folks never paid attention to the skinny boy with the broom, but I did. We were kids together once. He'd sit on my porch, talk about what he'd build one day. Said he'd own a street, just one small street, and make sure the people who lived there never felt forgotten." Nathan was quiet. Roger smiled faintly. He kept his promise. But why come back now looking like that? Roger's expression turned distant. "Because the money never meant what he thought it would. And because some debts, they aren't paid in dollars." That afternoon, a boy named Eli, maybe 10 years old, saw the man again. He was sitting on the bench outside the library, coat buttoned to the top, fedora tilted just so. Eli approached slowly, then stopped. "Are you the man from yesterday?" he asked. The stranger looked up. His face was kind. "I suppose I am. People say you're rich." The man chuckled softly. "I used to be. You don't look rich." "That's the idea." Eli tilted his head. "Why?" Donald studied the boy a moment, then answered, "Because when people think you're rich, they stop telling you the truth." Eli nodded like he understood, though he didn't fully. "I like your shoes." "Thank you. They've walked many roads. Are you going to stay here?" Donald looked out across the street. "Not forever. Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" "To remember something I forgot." Eli sat down beside him. The two stared into the distance like old friends, saying nothing more. By dusk, Donald made his way back to Mr. Green's shop. The cobbler had restored the Oxfords to life, stitched, polished, soles reinforced. "You work magic," Donald said. Green smiled. "You walk enough miles, the shoes tell a story. These ones, they've seen everything, haven't they?" Donald nodded. "Too much." Before leaving, he pulled something from his coat, a small velvet pouch. Inside was a gold coin, old, heavy, and etched with a symbol Green didn't recognize. I was given this a long time ago, Donald said, told to pass it along when the right time came. Green took it carefully. What does it mean? That sometimes what we carry has more value than we know, and sometimes giving it away is the only way to remember who we are. Word spread fast, not because Donald said anything, but because people felt something shift. The town, sleepy and aging, had stirred in its soul. The next morning he walked into the hardware store, shuttered for nearly 20 years, and unlocked the door with an old brass key. No one knew he had it. No one knew it still worked. Inside he moved among the dust and broken shelves. The air smelled of rust and forgotten dreams, and in the far back corner he found what he had hidden so long ago, a wooden box with a child's drawing taped to it. Crayon scrawl, faded now, but legible. One day, this will be home again, I promise. He sat on the cold floor, fingers brushing the drawing. I forgot this, he whispered. I forgot all of this. The bell above the door jingled. It was Rose, the florist, holding a small bouquet of white tulips. I figured you'd be here, she said gently. Donald stood, a little embarrassed. I used to think money would make me a giant, but all I ever wanted was this town to remember I tried. Rose stepped closer. Some places remember even when people forget. And some people carry the weight for all of us. He took the flowers with quiet reverence. I never built towers here, but I kept my word. And maybe, Rose said, that was the real tower. They stood in the silence of that forgotten store, surrounded by the dust of dreams and the hush of memories not yet lost. And just outside, the wind carried a soft whisper, like a secret finally returning home. The next day, a handwritten sign appeared on the window of the old hardware store. Open for memories. One day only. It was signed with a simple D. The town noticed. How could it not? Willow Springs hadn't seen excitement like this since the bicentennial parade in 1976. By 10 in the morning, curious residents lined the sidewalk outside the store, old folks leaning on canes, mothers holding their children's hands, and teenagers looking up from their phones, unsure what to expect. Inside, Donald Trump had cleared a path through the dust. He'd brought no helpers, no crew, just himself, moving with quiet purpose, like a man returning to an attic he'd once played in as a child. People walked through the door hesitantly at first, but once they crossed the threshold, something softened. On a table near the front, Donald had laid out relics from the past, old store receipts, photographs of the town from decades ago, and little handwritten cards with memories. One card read, Maggie's Diner used to serve rhubarb pie for a nickel. I bought my first one here. Another, Mr. Green taught me how to polish shoes. He said, respect begins at the heel. And another still, I swept this floor as a boy. I used to dream while I worked. People read the cards in silence. Maggie herself showed up around noon. She hadn't left her diner mid-shift in 20 years. She stood at the entrance, eyes moist. I remember that pie, she whispered. Donald stood beside her, hands folded. You never forgot how to make it. That mattered to me. Maggie turned slowly. Why didn't you ever come back before now? He sighed. I thought I had to win the world before I could be welcome here. But the world's loud. This place is quiet. You don't hear what you've lost until the noise stops. At that, she gently touched his arm. You were always welcome, Donnie. You just forgot the road home. By mid-afternoon, the mood had changed from curiosity to communion. It wasn't just a store reopening. It was a ritual of remembrance. People brought their own memories. One woman placed a locket on the counter. This fell through the floorboards here in 1962. My mother cried for a week. Donald took her hands in his. Then let's make sure it never gets lost again. He had no cameras, no press, no speeches, just listening, receiving, honoring. A teenager named Jamie approached hesitantly. My grandfather used to tell me a story, he said, about a boy who swept this street and said he'd own it one day. Everyone thought he was just dreaming. Donald smiled gently. He was. But dreaming isn't the same as lying. Sometimes dreams take a lifetime. Jamie looked at him closely. Was it you? Yes, he said simply. And it was your grandfather who gave me my first sandwich when I had nothing in my pockets but dust. As dusk approached, a few people lingered, unwilling to let go. The memories had wrapped around them like warm quilts. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the leaves into little dances along the sidewalk. Sheriff Mallory stood across the street, arms crossed. He hadn't gone in yet. Donald noticed. He stepped outside and crossed slowly. "Sheriff," he said, his voice low and respectful. "Mr. Trump, don't call me that. Not here." The sheriff's face softened. "I knew who you were the second day. It wasn't hard, but I figured you had your reasons." "I did." "Still do?" Donald looked down the street, his eyes thoughtful. "I came back to find something money never gave me." "And did you?" He paused. "I'm not sure yet." The sheriff nodded. "Well, I'll tell you something I do know. Folks around here don't care much for gold or titles, but they remember kindness. They remember decency." Donald's jaw tensed slightly. "I forgot how to be small. Everything got so big. The buildings, the fights, the noise. But not your promises," the sheriff said. "You kept those, quietly." They stood together in silence, the late sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Eventually, the sheriff asked, "What now?" "I'll leave," Donald said. "Soon. I didn't come to stay, just to mend something inside me." The sheriff offered his hand. "Then I hope it mends well." They shook, and the moment settled into memory. Later that night, Donald sat alone on the steps of the old store, wrapped in his long coat. The street was nearly empty. Only the soft hum of insects and the far-off bark of a dog stirred the air. Rose appeared, her florist apron still dusted with petals. "I brought something," she said. She handed him a photo, black and white. Young boys sitting on a curb, laughing, legs dusty and knees bruised. "That's us," he said, surprised. "Where did you find this?" "My father's attic. I always liked this one. You used to dream out loud." He stared at it a long while. "I still do, but I forgot how to dream quietly." Rose sat beside him. "You gave us a gift today. Not money, not buildings. You gave us you, the part we remembered, even when you didn't." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "Do you think they'll forgive me?" "You were never unforgiven," she whispered. "Just far away." The streetlights buzzed on, casting their soft amber light across the sidewalk. The scent of jasmine drifted from Rose's bouquet. And Donald Trump, once a boy with a broom, now a man with weathered hands and a quiet heart, looked out over the street he had never stopped loving. "I think I'm ready," he said. "For what?" "To let go." The morning after the one-day-only opening, Willow Springs felt lighter, as if the town had exhaled something it didn't know it had been holding. People walked slower. They looked each other in the eye more. They greeted strangers without suspicion. Donald wasn't seen that day. Not at Maggie's, not at Mr. Green's, not even at the hardware store. But his presence lingered in the little gestures. The way Maggie served extra pie without charging. The way old Mr. Thompson swept not only his sidewalk but the neighbors too. The way folks lingered a bit longer in front of the library bench, wondering if that quiet man in the fedora might return. In the early afternoon, Rose found an envelope taped to the door of her flower shop. Inside was a letter, written in neat cursive, and a small brass key. It read, "Dear Rose, this town has always been yours more than it was ever mine. You remembered me when I forgot myself. This key opens the back door to the hardware store. Inside, there's something I'd like you to keep alive, a space for memories, a place for healing. Call it whatever you wish. Thank you for not asking too many questions. D." Tears filled her eyes. She held the letter to her heart, then walked through town with new purpose. That evening, she gathered a small group. Maggie, Sheriff Mallory, Mr. Green, Nathan Carter, and even Jamie, the teenager. Together, they stepped into the store, lit by the soft glow of a few old lamps Donald had left behind. At the back was something none of them expected, a circle of chairs, a notebook on each seat. In the center, a wooden box with a sign, "Write it down. Let it live." Inside the box were dozens of entries already, memories, regrets, dreams, apologies, hopes, all anonymous, all handwritten. Nathan opened one. "I never told my father I was proud of him. He died thinking I was ashamed." Maggie read another. "I left town at 17. I said I'd never come back, but now I understand why my mother cried at the bus stop." It was a memory circle, a gift. Donald had created a space not to speak to the world, but to listen to the quiet within. Over the next few days, people began to gather, slowly at first, then more. No names were needed, just the courage to sit, to write, to remember. The mystery of Donald's visit had begun to shift. No longer was the town obsessed with who he was. They were focused on why he came, And the answer, whispered across hearts and porches and diner booths, was simple: to give something back before it was too late. One night, well past closing, Donald appeared again. Rose was inside the store, straightening the chairs, replacing the lamp oil. When she turned and saw him standing in the doorway, she didn't startle. She only smiled. "You kept it open," he said softly. "You left the light on first." He walked slowly, his movements a touch slower now, his coat slightly more worn, but his eyes were clear. "I don't have much time," he said. "You leaving?" "Yes, I was only ever here to remember something. And I have." He reached into his coat and handed her a sealed envelope. "When I'm gone, give this to Sheriff Mallory." "What's in it?" He smiled faintly. "A deed and a decision." Rose hesitated, then asked the question she had carried for days. "Why now, Donald? After all this time?" He sat down, folded his hands. "Because the world I built became too big for the boy I used to be. And sometimes, you have to return to the beginning to know where you lost your way." She nodded, eyes damp. "You're not that boy anymore." "No," he agreed. "But maybe I can leave behind something that honors him." The wind outside rattled the old windows. "I'll miss this place," he said, more to himself than to her. Not the buildings, not even the memories, but the silence. The way silence in a small town isn't empty. It's full of everything you forgot you needed. He stood to leave, hesitating at the door. "Promise me one thing? Anything. Don't let the world steal your quiet." And then he was gone again. The next morning, the envelope was delivered to Sheriff Mallory. Inside was a transfer of ownership document, deeding the hardware store, the theater, and 3 other buildings to a community trust in the town's name. Donald had bought them years ago, but now he had given them back. Not sold, not loaned, given. And the trust came with a clause: "These properties are to be used only for healing, community, and memory, not for profit, not for ego, and never for forgetting." It was signed in ink with one line: Donald J. Trump. In memory of a street once swept by a boy who believed in quiet dreams. Word spread quickly, but it was not met with media vans or flashing cameras. Just candles on porches, just hands held tighter, just voices lowered in reverence. No one saw him leave. There was no car, no luggage, no farewell speech. He vanished the way he had come, softly. But in the weeks that followed, something bloomed in Willow Springs. The hardware store became the memory room, open daily for quiet writing, reflection, and storytelling. The Ridley Theater reopened with free performances by local actors, some who'd never been on stage before. The opening show was titled The Boy with the Broom. Maggie renamed a pie after him, the Quiet Dreamer's Rhubarb. And Rose kept the flower shop door unlocked an hour later every night, just in case someone still needed a moment of grace. Life resumed, but differently. The street, once owned in silence, now sang with the kind of wealth that can't be counted. And somewhere, perhaps on another quiet bench, in another quiet town, a man in a long coat and polished shoes might be watching a child sweep a sidewalk and smiling. Seasons changed, as they always do. The leaves of Willow Springs turned golden, then fell. Winter came with its hush and soft blankets of snow, and through it all, the town kept its quiet rhythm, now tuned to a gentler song. The memory room became a sacred space. Children wrote letters to their future selves. Veterans shared stories they'd kept buried for years. Widows wrote love notes to those they'd lost. There were no cameras, no visitors from outside looking to capitalize. Just a town remembering itself. On the wall behind the old counter, Rose had framed the boy's drawing, the one Donald found, crayon on yellowed paper. "One day, this will be home again. I promise." Below it, she'd placed a brass plaque. He kept his promise. Sheriff Mallory, now weeks from retirement, often sat by the window and watched the street. "Funny," he said to Maggie one day over coffee, "how a man can build towers 1,000 feet high and still be remembered best for the way he walked through a small town without a single spotlight." "He didn't need one," Maggie said, pouring more coffee. "The way he looked at people, that was the light." On the edge of town, near the riverbank where the old warehouse stood, plans quietly took shape. Using the remaining properties from the community trust, the town began creating something new, the Willow Center for Reflection and Hope. There would be no fees, no press releases, just a quiet invitation. Come sit, come heal, come remember. And while no one ever saw Donald return, his spirit showed up everywhere. In the little girl who, during her first recital at the Ridley Theatre, wore a tiny fedora in his honor. In the old man, who after years of silence, stood in the memory room and finally read aloud the letter he wrote to his son lost in Vietnam. In the teenage boy who spent his afternoons sweeping the front of Maggie's diner, saying he wanted to learn the value of starting small. And in Rose, every evening before locking her shop, whispering thank you to the wind, in case it still carried his name. Then one crisp spring morning, a letter arrived, postmarked from a private care facility in upstate New York. It was addressed to the people of Willow Springs. Inside was a single page, handwritten. You gave me more than I ever gave you. You reminded me that a man is not remembered for the noise he made, but for the silence he shared, the quiet moments, the little promises. You helped me find that boy again. I go now in peace, knowing I was loved not for what I had, but for what I left behind. With gratitude, Donald. They buried the letter behind the memory room, under a small flowering dogwood tree. No plaque, no announcement, just petals in the breeze, and the whisper of paper beneath the earth. Years passed. New families came. Children grew. The world outside continued to rush forward, faster and noisier each day. But Willow Springs remained different. People still told the story, though always in soft voices, about the man who came dressed in a coat too worn for his name, carrying nothing but memories, and leaving behind a treasure no bank could hold. Visitors, now and then, would wander through town. Some heard rumors, others just happened upon it. They'd ask, is it true? Did he really live here? And the townsfolk would smile gently. Not lived, they'd say. He remembered here. In time, that became the quiet motto of the town, a place for remembering. One rainy afternoon, Jamie, now a young man, stood in the memory room, helping a child sharpen a pencil for her first letter. She looked up and asked, "Why do we write here?" Jamie thought for a moment, then said, "Because some stories don't live unless we let them out. And this place makes them safe." He didn't mention Donald. He didn't need to. Outside, the street shimmered with rain. Tulips bloomed in Rose's window. The sheriff's replacement walked his morning route, tipping his hat like the man once did. And a new girl at Maggie's had begun experimenting with a pie she called Second Chances. And in the soft hush of that peaceful little town, if you stood still long enough, you could almost hear the quiet footsteps of a man in polished shoes walking down the middle of Main Street, not as a tycoon, not as a headline, but as a promise fulfilled. A man who once dressed like a poor man, but left a town richer than anyone could ever measure.